The Historicity of the New Testament, South Florida Bible College and Theological Seminary, Christians Apologetics, Professor Reed, written by Melvin Montgomery Jr. and orally presented. For centuries, scholars, scribes, secular and sacred societies have raised questions about the reliable historical sources of the incarnate Jesus Christ and the New Testament. The Bible itself is a very reliable source of history and contains what the authors originally wrote. For our purposes, let us assume that the New Testament is a collection of 27 separate historical sources, which, in turn, may have written or oral sources behind them. We make no assumptions, which takes the New Testament as a divinely inspired document, although I believe such a position can be defended. General tests for historicity have been conducted to prove the New Testament is factual and historical. Historiography is a branch of study that focuses on the logical, conceptual, and epistemological aspects of what historians do. The author noted, for example, apologists have often appealed to three general tests for historicity: the bibliographical test, the internal test, and the external test. The bibliographical test seeks to determine how many manuscript copies we have of the document and how far removed are they in time from the originals. P.J. Moreland points out that the New Testament has been remarkably confirmed time and again by external evidence. And there are approximately 5,000 Greek manuscripts containing all or part of the New Testament. There are 8,000 manuscript copies of the Vulgate, a Latin translation of the Bible done by Jerome from 382 to 405, and more than 350 copies of the Syriac, Christian Aramaic versions of the New Testament. These originated from 150 to 250. Most of the copies are from the 400s. Besides this, virtually the entire New Testament could be reproduced from citations contained in works of the early church fathers. There are some 32,000 citations in the writings of the fathers prior to the Council of Nicaea 325. Moreland says, a strong case can be made for the fact that much of the New Testament, including the Gospels and sources behind them, was written by eyewitness. This is mentioned explicitly in a number of places: Luke 1, 1-4, Galatians 1, 2 Peter 1:16. He also lists three objections to eyewitness influence. First, it has been argued that after the experience of the Easter event, a powerful subjective feeling of the presence of Christ after Jesus' death, the church lost interest in the biographical details of the historical Jesus who really lived. Rather, believers were interested in the ongoing experience of Christ who was continuing with them. Second argument for the existence of these prophets points to the utterance of Christ in the book of Revelation. See Revelations 1:17-20. C.H. Dodd has argued that the chronological order of Jesus' ministry, as is given in the sermons, parallels nicely the order given in Mark. J.P. Morgan states that this shows the gospel writers were interested in historical details. Looking deeper into the authorship of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul traced the biographical details of Jesus' life in Romans 15:3-8, 2 Corinthians 8-9, Philippians 2:6-11. The passion narratives of Jesus' last hours on earth were formed and circulated early in the missionary and teaching ministries of the church. Early converts and citizens alike would have inquired about the personage of Jesus. What type of man was he? Why would the Roman government crucify a carpenter? It is my opinion that the first century church, as well as the secular society, would have formulated and circulated testimonies and theories about Jesus. Thus causes one to inquire more about me, in which the four Gospels has provided. When the Gospels are compared with the ancient biographies, they can be seen to be a biography as well. The skeptic or the believer cannot deny the fact that the Gospels have a message to convey and does not rule out their historical dimension, inextricably the historical and theological understanding of the incarnation. A second objection to the eyewitness nature of the New Testament record of Jesus argues that the ancient people were less interested in the facts than they were today, and thus ancient historians were not concerned or able to distinguish fact from fiction. This objection does not accurately represent the nature of historical writing in the ancient world. Moreland states that many ancient Greek historians saw the importance of accurate reporting. Herodotus emphasized the role of eyewitness and the evaluation of sources. Theocles attempted to evaluate the accuracy of reports coming to him, and when he invented a speech, he did so to represent as well as possible the views of one speaker. He did not feel free to invent a narrative. Polybius held exacting standards. He advocated examining sources and evaluating eyewitnesses. Lucian stated that the historian's sole task is to tell the tale as it happened. The Greeks strongly influenced the Roman historians. Ancient historians were not as critical or precise as their modern counterparts, but the question, did it really happen, made sense to them. The New Testament writers showed a concern to preserve historical facts accurately. Luke 1:1-4, John 21:24, Hebrews 2:3-4, 2 Peter 1:16. This does not prove they wrote history, but it clearly shows that they understood the difference between fact and fiction, and they were interested in the former. Third objection against the eyewitness nature of the New Testament record comes from D.E. Newnham. Newnham argues that gospel materials present themselves in a classifiable form which meet needs in the early church. Thus, they are the result of a great deal of shaping at the hands of the early Christian community. The apostles are the authority and the key eyewitnesses and guardians of the New Testament. The gospel and Jewish oral tradition were passed down through generations. We have original documents. They were copied and orally passed down to the followers of the apostles and their disciples known as the church fathers. The influence of the school of New Testament studies known as the Scandinavian or Uppsala school founded by Harold Rosenfeld and Bringer Gershenhansen trends to have been toward understanding the Gospels as Jewish documents with a Jewish influence shaping them. Uppsala school holds that Jesus' tradition was shaped consciously by the same principles that govern the shaping of Jewish oral tradition in general. According to this view, Jesus was an authoritative teacher or rabbi who trained the disciples to be his apprentices. In keeping with the practice of their orally orientated culture, they were capable of accurately memorizing massive amounts of material. The disciples of Jesus took great care to memorize his teachings and deeds. They may have written down some of the material as well, and some of their responsibility as guardians of the tradition. In conclusion, I believe the New Testament and its depiction of Jesus Christ of Nazareth are accurate, reliable, and historical documents that have stood the test of time. Some people will believe it because it's true, and others will believe it because of their faith. Then in 1 Corinthians 15:6-8, we have eyewitness accounts of believers. There was early testimony of the life of Jesus written down from people who had first had hand contact with him before and after the resurrection. Acts 2:22-24. Eyewitness testimony contains over 140 details between the book of Acts and the Gospel of John that record the ministry of miracles of Jesus. Well, embarrassing testimony. 11 of the 12 men that Jesus picked gave us their excruciating testimony of the crucifixion. They were all crucified by the Roman government and died for the sake of the gospel. The apostles died horrible deaths, and each one of them died with the truth of what Jesus said and what Jesus did. Then we have expected testimony. The Old Testament prophecy of coming Messiah, Jesus fulfilled this prophecy and is still reigning in the hearts of men and women. And lastly, we have extra biblical testimony. There are over 10 ancient non-Christian sources that accurately recorded the life and lessons of Jesus and the history of the church written in the New Testament. The Bible informs us that the incarnate Jesus Christ was the Son of God, who was condemned to a cross by Pontius Pilate, died on the cross to atone for the sins of the world, and rose on the third day from the dead. This is the good news of the gospel, and it is true. And that is what I proudly proclaim.